want you to know this. I prayed for this and it happened.
Let me ask you a question. Did you play Sonic Frontiers in November of 2022, and were you left disappointed at how the final island looked the same as the first? Had limited enemy variety, multiple fast and done cyberspace stages, and a pretty weak final boss? Well, good news, because Sega and Sonic team agree, so they just redid it a year later for free. Yay! After playing through Frontiers, I left the game feeling pretty good overall, but with some major gripes, which seemed to be the case for most people. It restored a lot of faith I had for future titles, and with the promise of free DLC updates coming through the next year, it was really exciting to see what the game would be like after everything was done. The first two being more minor ones, still adding fun stuff like challenge and trial modes, birthday visuals, very unfun Coco trials, and grilling meat. Not to mention the jukebox, which can this please just be a mainstay feature from now on? So like, this is so much better than just listening to the somber, repetitive island music on repeat. But all the eyes were really on the last update, promising more story and being able to actually play as Tails, Amy, and Knuckles. Imagine that, being able to play as Sonic's friends in a mainline Sonic game. How long since that's been the case? Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, we didn't even know what this update was really going to be. Originally, I thought we were getting a continuation until the trailer dropped and insinuated that they were rewriting the ending. Like, think about that for a second. A lot of games nowadays release broken, incomplete, and are rushed out to make their release dates. So to then see a studio acknowledge that they weren't able to fully realize their finale due to budget and time restrictions, see how good the game sold and was received, and to then go back and just redo it. Like, that's crazy to me. Not stopping there, while I was working on this video, they even updated the DLC to fix several issues after everyone thought that the support was over. Like, Sonic Team has a better upload schedule than me. So in the final horizon, you play an alternate scenario of the ending that instead of Tails, Amy, and Knuckles going back into cyberspace to free Sonic of his corruption and allow him to save the day, they stay in the real world and help out finding the emeralds. So now we get to play as them. Yay! Ray Island still has the same layout, but is now filled with color-coded platforms, challenges, and Coco to earn XP. There are a ton of these for each character, and clearing up the map takes significantly longer than the base game did. And you can also occasionally unearth and collect Lookout Coco in order to unlock the trial towers. I'll get to those later. Switching to the others feels a little jarring at first after exclusively playing Sonic up until this point, and it takes some time getting used to their gameplay. They even all come with their own theme songs, which, while good, restricts you from using the jukebox while playing as them, which kinda sucks. Like, you give me this cool feature, and then you take it away from me. They each have a more limited boost and side loop, which makes it feel like playing a Sonic who has sustained chronic leg damage by default, but once you start getting into the skill trees, that's when stuff starts to get pretty crazy. Amy is pretty good overall, using her tarot cards to hover in the air like you just don't care, and actually make the platforming sections somewhat decent, even having a multiple target lock death strike. Once you get her fully upgraded and get her to max rings, her boost turns into this cool move where she rides her hammer like a witch broom, which is pretty decent for getting around, but kinda pales in comparison to the other options. Speaking of options, you have Tails, who is just completely broken. He doesn't even have a homing attack, but instead throws an avalanche of wrenches, which are even able to deflect projectiles.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
Of course, he's able to fly, which is easily the most versatile and useful ability in the game, where platforming sections become a breeze, especially once you upgrade him and get him to max rings, which turns his boost into the tornado. This thing just beats the entire game. Don't have fast travel yet, and you need to get to the other side of the map? No problem. You fell off of a high platform and don't want to work your way back up? Easy. Need to get through a difficult platforming section to get to a Coco? Literally just skip the entire thing and go to the end. Who even cares? This ability is so ridiculous. At one point, an indicator sends you straight up into the sky, and I used the tornado and just kept going up, wondering if that was even what I was supposed to do, and yep. There was a platform just right there. It's kind of hilarious how much Tails just breaks the cycle of the game and how you're normally supposed to play it with anyone else. And last but not least is my favorite, Knuckles, and I will tell you right now that he was easily the character I was looking forward to playing the most, and how much it pains me to say that he is easily the worst character in the game. Like, his attacks are perfectly fine, and his glide is okay, but it's much slower than Amy's broom and inferior in every way to Tails' well, everything, and his climbing is finicky as hell. Trying to scale a wall or around a corner is like playing a horror game to how occasionally he doesn't even properly stick to surfaces or connect to edges, or just decides to let go at times. I even just straight up clipped through a wall on one of the trial towers, causing me to lose about 5 minutes of progress. The cyberspace stages have also been redone, where before Ria did have more stages than the other islands, but they were shorter and barely left an impression. Now it feels like they use the new stages as a testing ground for potential future gameplay ideas, since all of them introduce new new gimmicks. Rocket Boost Pod, Shadow Races, Time Bomb Challenge, and Stage 4G introducing a rev meter for no reason. Like seriously, this thing is so random. These stages also have a significant difficulty spike in comparison to the base game stages. I'm talking worse than stage 1-2. Where before I barely used the spin dash, and you can call that ignorance or a skill issue or whatever on my part, but here it almost feels necessary in order to reach a good time. The level design is also way more platforming heavy, which on one hand is welcome. More branching paths, more choices, more variety and replayability, you know, great. But I'd like to bring back from the Frontiers video that the physics in cyberspace are not that great. And the platforming heavy sections in these levels are straight up bad. Like in stage 4H, which has multiple of these little sections where you have to jump from box to box, and you can tell that this game's physics just are not built for precision platforming. But the honor of worst new stage for me personally goes to 4B, because Jesus Christ, I don't know what happened in the design phase, but the way that your momentum gets halted by an invisible wall after the ramp here that can just screw your run, or the way that the spin dash interacts with these collapsible platforms is just awful. He doesn't even land, he just dips to the side immediately and down, and this happened every single time, so it's not just an isolated accident. That aforementioned difficulty spike is not just in the cyberspace stages, no, it's also spread out into the wildlife, who have evolved from mild annoyance to taker of assholes. Where several just have their ideas and encounters expanded on, there are also several whose fights I can only describe as bunk, drivel, hogwash, or to put it simpler, bullshit. Wait, can I just be honest here for a second? What is this? Like, what is this? Sega, Sonic Team, what the hell? Like, I don't even know what's going on here. I can barely see the screen. I can barely see Sonic. Is that the strategy? To blind me with things so I die? Because mission accomplished, I'll tell you that. Circling back, remember that I mentioned the challenge towers earlier? And you can also occasionally unearth and collect lookout cocoa in order to unlock the trial towers. I'll get to those later. Yeah, I know I'm repeating myself here, but these have also gotten a major difficulty spike in comparison to the base game, which has raised the stress level from butt-cheek clenching to pants shitting. None of this is helped by the previously mentioned poor platforming physics. Seriously, what the hell is this? Come on! It's also not a good sign that when I looked up help for when I got stuck, almost the entire first page of videos and links just consist of set the difficulty to easy, which I refuse because my mom didn't raise a bitch. And before you think you can make it easier on yourself and manually save your progress while climbing, they thought of that and the game will default you back to the bottom instead, so it's a one-way through trial and you best hope you don't overstep or the physics mess up, or it's all the way back down and to the beginning you go. But if your patience survives and you do make it to the top, you get to do the trials, which are actually not that bad and mostly just rely on exploiting your moveset like homing attack stomping or mashing the counter button, but the last trial is something else. It's total bullshit. The final trial, unlike the other basic enemy challenges, is a boss trial where you have to get through all 3 Titan bosses in a row within a single ring cycle. Take too long or take too many hits and you'll sit there in total panic as your precious ring count bleeds out in front of your eyes. As expected, Giganto being the first boss isn't that big of a problem and can be steamrolled with ease, and surprisingly enough, Night isn't the hardest one either and just requires a little bit of timing and maybe some sequence skipping. No, the reason this trial is so aggravating, to the point that I needed to take a break from playing the game, was Wyvern. This trial has single-handedly made Wyvern go from my favorite to my least favorite boss in the game, because if you play the sequence as is, it basically guarantees you'll take too long and lose too many rings to face Night. Where with Giganto and Night, the walk-ups are fine with a decent risk attached, but Wyvern's just takes too goddamn long, and you have to do this every single time you fail, and once you get to the fight, that's when all the real nonsense starts. The big problem here is that Wyvern's fight relies on the parry in order to get through it as fast as possible. The parry that doesn't work very well and is really unreliable, especially on higher difficulties. You have to use this to reflect the missiles, which are annoying as is to spot in the level, but can also still hit you when you're locked in an animation where you have no control, which screws up your run. Then the time in between attack phases just takes way too goddamn long, with on top of that this claw swipe. Look at this hitbox. Look at it.
No, look at it!
This is when you're supposed to parry this attack. That claw is not making contact with that hedgehog. Also in this trial, side-looping becomes very important to making the Titans vulnerable and dealing as much damage as possible. However, with Wyvern side-looping in the second half of the fight actually messes up your chance to attack it, and it becomes basically pointless, adding even more nonsense. What did they do to you, my beautiful son? Then finally the part that I, and I think most people were excited for, the Supreme boss. Base game Supreme was surprisingly the easiest Titan in the game, and then the true final boss fight against the end, which ended up just being the hacking minigame, and The whole thing was just such a letdown at the end. The first phase is still the same. Dodge yellow, second amendment, and boom, he's down. And then the second phase kicks things up a notch with the end activating his dial-up connection and juicing up Supreme for the fight.
Hello, your computer has virus.
Sonic then counters by assuming his new superpowered form. Blue. With the power of blue, you can now attack Supreme's head and parry these ring-sucking spheres. At least I would parry them if these goddamn trees weren't in the way! Now, I do have to highlight something pretty serious. The idea here is that you attack Supreme, and obviously try to get his health bar to 0, but you're quickly gonna run into the issue of this cable healing Supreme, like a baby getting nutrients from its big evil moon mom. And I got the idea then, while fighting it, that I have to either outdamage it, or prevent the heal from happening by side-looping Supreme and putting it in the stun state, but eventually this just doesn't work, even with cheesing by spamming the homing stomp that quickly fails to be effective, and you're just sitting there thinking, how do I stop or outdamage this? And then I went looking for an answer, and what I found is honestly a pretty big example of just straight up incompetent game design. Look, you can call this a skill issue or something you have to think outside of the box of, but after looking through Steam and YouTube comments, this seems to be a common issue with this boss fight. The apparent solution is to attack the head, then use the dodge buttons to switch targets to the cable and attack and sever it so you could freely do damage. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't feel like I am since again, I saw a ton of other people also having this issue, this is not something that is communicated nor telegraphed throughout the game or this boss fight, which is honestly a pretty bad element of game design to introduce this mechanic at this stage with almost no communication. This is something that should have been telegraphed better, and honestly I would have accepted a quick Sonic Generation style pop-up from my friends telling me what to do here.
Kill that motherfucker! Kill all our friends!
Other than that, the boss itself is pretty straightforward, where you get him down, side-loop his gun, steal his second amendment, and pull an Uno reverse card on him to get to the next phase. Which, apart from the added task of defending the shield, is basically the same, and now you use the attack and dodge to get on top of his back and parry his wacky flailing arms. Like, this boss has some really frustrating parts, but then Sonic pulls out some random anime move and I just completely forget what I was complaining about, because that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. The feel of this entire boss fight is also just so much better than the base games, which is only elevated by Kellin Quinn's remix of I'm Here blasting through the whole thing. Then Sonic upgrades his second amendment by just becoming the bullet and going, super cyber corrupt blue Sonic. I don't know. So then the end is dead, and yes, dead because Ian Flynn confirmed it himself, and the ending is surprisingly similar to the original, just now Sage is with Eggman, so it's a less sad ending than before, and I guess Sage is sticking around as a potential reoccurring antagonist. Possibly. Maybe. She's in the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, so who knows. So at the end of this, I just have to say, it's good. It's flawed, but I'm still really happy with the end result, and it makes me excited for the future. The fact that they went out of their way to make this and give it to us for free is just great. And then on top of that, you add the new potential gameplay mechanics and playable characters, and you have a really exciting base for whatever they come up with next. So this whole expansion just gets a big ol' thumbs up and gold star.